Hello, Cyber Warriors. Today, English Tech Talk series, we are going to have an insight from Jeffrey Wheatman. And let me give a small introduction about Mr. Jeffrey. So, 2003, he started a co-founder of Brute Force Security. Then later on, he's a principal consultant. And after that, it's been like 22 years. He worked in multiple designations. It is a principal consultant and then a practice manager of information security and then the vice president of research and advisory and then a cyber risk management in Gartner. And then he worked as an advisor and then he is a speaker at DEFCON. So like 22 years he's just giving a speaker at the DEFCON. And right now he's an SVP. And it's been like 22 years of experience Jeffrey is having, and we are going to get lots of insights from Jeffrey. And welcome, Jeffrey, for our channel.
Oh,
And
it is my pleasure to be here. And it's actually closer to 30 years at this point now. I just don't have all of that stuff on my LinkedIn. I don't think anyone's interested in what I did back then, but yeah, it's I've been doing this for 3 decades.
Wow, that's great, Jeffrey. Thanks for your time, Jeffrey. So, I'll give a small introduction about the CyberVoyage, Jeffrey. And in 2021, we have started CyberVoyage channel for particularly cybersecurity educations to bring more insights on cybersecurity. And it's been like 3.5 years so far. We do have a 450K cyber warriors. We say cyber warriors. The questions or insights or whatever which I'm going to get, which I'm going to ask to you, those questions are asked by our cyber warriors through comments or to personal messages. So they'll be asking us on Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp threads, and likewise we get the questions from them. And here we would like to get an insights because all the information I cannot share it to them. That's why we bring a cyber security tech talk series across world. We are speaking with multiple experts like you. That's what you also mentioned. You have 30 years of experience because we would like to get more insights from you, Jeffrey. And first question. I would like to ask with you. It's been 30 years, Jeffrey. So when I looked at LinkedIn, you have lots of experience in a 360 diverse experience in cybersecurity. And how did you get into a cybersecurity like 30 years back? And I would like to know most of them 10 years back people wants to get into cybersecurity. Yes, they have a domain. We had a domain and people had a domain. And but 30 years back, and how did you pitch into this particular domain? And you're staying for a long time. And what have changed and what you have learned, Jeffrey?
Yes, I always like this question because I sort of stepped into it in a way that I don't really think works anymore. I was a network person and I was working for a consulting company, and there were rumors that the company was going to be bought, which turned out to be true. So as a result, there were no new projects. So I was working, 4 or 5 hours a week, and I stumbled across a website called 2600, and I found a series of papers written by someone who called themselves the Happy Hacker. Her name was Carolyn Meinum, and basically I taught myself how to be a pen tester. It wasn't even called that back then, but I realized that security was just much more interesting than the networking stuff that I was doing. And I decided I wanted to be a security person. And I sort of, pivoted and moved my career in that direction. So, I've done security engineering, I've done pen testing, strategy, governance. I mean, I've sort of done everything. But really, I found that my strength was much more around strategic planning and communication and governance than it was, because I was not a very good pen tester, to be quite honest. But I figured out how to get in using social engineering. So I like to listen to people, and I've gotten good at sort of taking their thoughts and aggregating and kind of synthesizing. Here are the things that people are trying that work. Here are the things that people try that don't. And really nowadays, I coach chief security officers, chief information security officers, CIOs, chief risk officers on how to build programs, how to manage third-party risk, because that's an area where I spend a lot of my time these days. How to communicate, how to go in front of the board, how to justify sort of why we do the things that we do. So that's kind of how I got where I am today.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So you have articulated very well, and you wanted to be a pen tester, and then you just moved to a networking domain, and then you started networking things, and then, but your passion is about to bring a strategic planning, and follow up on this question, strategic planning. because being a 30 years of cybersecurity professionals, you spoke with multiple, you might be speaking with multiple board of directors. And if you want to speak with the directors using a movie analogy, and which movie you pick it up for the cybersecurity, and which movie you can take it up and we can tell like, oh, this movie we can bring this as a cybersecurity steps, and which movie analogy you can take it up, Jeffrey, if you are speaking with the board of directors.
Yeah, so great. So you turned it around on me because that's the question I always ask on my podcast. So I think the kind of movie and the movie I would pick, I think would really depend upon the message I want to get across. Um, so some of the topics, for example, that I talk about would be sort of risky behavior. So I think, based on that, maybe I would use, I don't know, like maybe Star Wars or a sci-fi movie would be an example where they're always doing risky things, but they're always balancing what are the outcomes. So, are we going to be able to save this race of aliens? Are we going to, keep the Klingons or the Empire out? So for that, I think I would kind of talk about that. I think for if I want to articulate something around like data protection, one of my favorite security movies of all time is called Sneakers, back in the 90s. And Sneakers was all about don't believe what you're told. People are going to try to mislead you. We have to think about how we're going to protect our data and how to get around that. And that movie is a great movie because it's actually aged quite well. I think if I was talking more about sort of business goals and objectives, I would, maybe pick a movie around where there's a company sort of at risk or at stake. The Steve Jobs movie, I think, is a great example because, he was with a company and they kicked him out and he went and started his own thing. And then he came back and he saved the company. So I think a lot of it really gets to what point are we trying to make? What are we trying to articulate? And then I would sort of back into a movie from there. I will just add sort of one last thing. I think the key thing is we want to make sure that we're referencing movies that resonate with the audience. So, you're talking to someone who likes romantic comedies and you're talking about science fiction, not going to land as well. If you're talking to somebody who likes, Marvel superhero movies and you're talking about a drama, might not necessarily sort of land that well. So I think understanding your audience is going to drive a lot of the examples that you would use. And to be fair, I've been doing this for so long, I don't even really have to think about a lot of the references that I make. My wife always jokes that I know more about pop culture than anyone she knows, so I can pull a movie quote out of thing. One of the movies I talk about all the time is a movie called The Princess Bride, and in The Princess Bride, there's a character who keeps using the word inconceivable, and another character in the movie says, you keep using that word. I don't think that word means what you think that word means. Right. So that's a great example for communication strategy. We're saying this and we think you're hearing it differently than we actually mean it. So being able to understand those things, I think is really powerful for effective communication.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So you have given couple of movie names. Like first thing is the risky behaviors, and then I'll take couple of movies, and then you mention a name of Sneakers, and you given a statement as well. Don't believe what you have told, and it was a good statement. And then one more movie also you have mentioned, Steve Jobs and Princess Bride. So likewise, you've mentioned couple of movies because as a cybersecurity professional, so because I was a hardcore gamer for 30 years. I usually play games for Watch Dogs because when a cybersecurity comes to an organization, because people plays game as a watchdogs, and let's say if I want to build a cybersecurity approach, and what approach I need to take it forward as a startup company or else as an enterprise organization. Let's say if you look at because as a layman who plays a game, when the person who plays a game like in watchdogs, they say we can hack a drones, we can hack a systems, we do have a centralized operating system, we can hack a networks, we can hack everything whatever we have. Because 2 years back there was a bloodline game, they mentioned like everything can be hackable. So at this, such kind of scenarios, based on those things, people try to hack. They are try to penetrate in a real-time organization. Because when I was looking at a couple of articles, they mentioned I played Watch Dogs. That's why I was about to try or hack or infiltrate in any networks and a production environment. In such a scenarios, whether how do I make sure to defend all these mechanisms, because we cannot protect all the, we cannot say like tell them like you cannot hack me at situation. How do I make sure to keep all the 360 cyber defense to my environment, to make sure which all the aspects? So how do I build a cyber security program internally, and then how do I convince all these programs that can be integrated? And then one more, gamified environment also, which we can pick it in our in an organization. And how do we convince all these kind of scenarios? Because people who like to play games, of course they need to, they can they can play a game in an environment to make sure our environment is safe. And how to build a cyber security gamified environment in an organization to make sure our environment is safe, Mr. Jeffrey.
Yeah, so that's a great sort of way to look at it. So I am not a gamer. I've never really been a gamer, but my kids are, my son especially. And I think when it comes to sort of building a program, I always like to start with the governance piece, because we need to understand what kind of assets are at stake. We need to understand what the business cares about. So going to them, and I always sum it up, and it's an oversimplification, but your executives care about money coming in, money going out, and if something goes bad, who gets in trouble? And I know it's much more complicated than that, but when I work with CISOs who are struggling, either building a plan or a program or maturing their program, I always tell them you always got to hook back into those things, because that's what the CFO cares about, the COO, the CEO, your board, those kind of folks. So once you get them engaged and help them understand, look, we're not here to say no, we're not here to say stop, we're not here to say don't. We want to understand what your objectives are for the organization, whether it's a business or a public sector entity or a not-for-profit. Understand what they're trying to accomplish at the end of the day. And then we deconstruct those things down into process and then technology. And then I like to kind of turn it back the other way and say, well, people, process, and tools are what is required. I always say we got to build the process first, then we hire the people to implement the process, and then we buy the tools to help us do automation and create efficiencies. I think the biggest mistake that security leaders tend to make is they lead with what can we buy, because that's easier. But I think we really need to lean with people and process, and help our executives understand we're not going to get rid of all the risk, because that's not practical, it's not feasible, and it certainly wouldn't be a good use of funds. But we need to figure out how can we balance that we do that. And then to add a little bit of color, I feel like we need to do a better job of balancing protective measures, so things we do before to limit the likelihood of something happening, with responsive and detective measures. So when the bad thing happens, how quickly can we get back up and running? How quickly can we identify it? And really creating that kind of balance between left of boom, right of boom. So not putting all our eggs in one basket. The old security model was the crunchy security model, right? Hard and crunchy on the outside, soft and gooey inside, which was, let's put up firewalls and perimeters and we're good. Except once the bad actors got through that wall, they were inside and there were no controls. So being able to balance that, looking at things like compliance and legal requirements, and that's a global problem. Looking at the changing environment, looking at what our business is doing. AI is the big buzzword now. I don't think it's legal to have a conversation where AI does not get brought up anymore, but our businesses are using it. They may not even know, because they're buying products and services from companies that are using it. They're not necessarily telling IT. They're not necessarily telling security. And I did a panel back in the spring last year for MIT Sloan Business School up in Boston. And we had a great panel on AI and security. And then I asked the audience, how many of you have a governance policy in place for AI, and only about 10% of the hands went up. And I said, okay, so here's the problem. We're going to tell you a bunch of really good stuff, and you're not going to be able to do any of it because you don't have governance, you don't have the framework, you're not in a position where you can tell people, hey, you just loaded data up into essentially what is a public data store. Are you good with that? Because I don't think you should be good with that. So without that governance and without the policy framework, all the other stuff is just throwing things against the wall and hoping to see what sticks. And that's just not sustainable. I actually had a conversation this morning with a friend of mine. We've spent trillions of dollars on security, and most people don't really feel any better off. I think we're actually worse off just because the attacker profiles have changed. So that's kind of my take on that.
Thanks, Jeffrey. You have given a nice statement. Money coming in and out. If something happens, is going to be a trouble. And it was a great statement, Jeffrey. And then also you mentioned most of the companies, they are going to buy a tools, but they don't care about people and process. If we have a process and people, and of course we can buy a tool. And you clearly mentioned that's what the PPT comes in. Build a process, whatever the tool which you're going to install, which you're going to onboard, or which you're going to keep it in an on-prem or any environment, build a process. And then people recruit, hire people, hire a bunch of experts, and so that they can manage a tool, then buy a tool. But you mentioned most of the companies, they just buy a tool, whatever the tool comes in, whatever the tool comes in the market, they just keep purchasing and then keep it in an environment without process and people. That's where we need to have a balance. You clearly mentioned how quickly we do have a respond to the particular attack or any kind of scenario happens, how to balance it. And thanks for your insights, Mr. Jeffrey. Now, as a cybersecurity expert, how do we protect our brand? Because when we are a CISO, when we are speaking with the global directors, they care about the brand stuffs, because nowadays ransomware attacks, it comes in and they will be sending a message like, we will do such a kind of activities and we will exploit your system and then we will damage your brand. And to make sure to protect our brand, what kind of strategies that an organization can perform? Because the question has been raised by a founder of a startup company to through our channel. I do have a budget of 1 crore rupee, 1 crore INR, or a $10,000. I do have a budget, so I don't have any kind of new process and nothing. I don't have, but I want to work on a cybersecurity company. I just wanted to start up a company where to protect my brand, what are all the things I need to take care of? Because I do have website, I do have an asset, but to protect my brand, because after 1 year of service, if some ransom attack happens to my organization, of course they'll ask us like, hey, see, we have hacked your data, we are going to post it in social media, we are going to damage your brand. Such kind of scenarios may happen, may not happen. But for all these scenarios, how do I protect my brand to make sure my company is safe, to make sure my customers are in a safer environment or safer zone, because they will be coming to us. So we do provide a cyber security service. Now, if my brand is good, then only they can come, because after some point, if my brand is broken or damaged, no one will come, my customer will go like anything. So how to make sure to protect my brand in a small scale, even an enterprise organization as well, like 100 years of company. Even they recently there was an Oracle attack happens. There was some lots of insights, lots of things are going on in internet. In such kind of scenario, how to make sure to protect my brand and how to make sure I am compliant with that, Mr. Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's a very big question. I feel like protecting the brand is not really the responsibility of the cybersecurity team. That is an enterprise-wide problem. That being said, I think there are some things that you can do to sort of help support brand preservation. So one of them, and we've started to see a ton of this at Black Kite, is this concept of building a trust center. So more and more organizations are publishing to the open internet, here's what we do to protect your data. Here's what we do to protect operations. Here's what we do to make sure that we are able to keep our business up and running. And I think that mapping your brand to a trust center and to a set of committed behaviors and values and a mission and vision, I think is very powerful. I think the second thing is really about transparency when something happens. So you use Oracle, and I don't know anything about the Oracle attack. Oracle says they were not breached. I know a bunch of people who I trust who have inside information who say they absolutely were, but they keep denying. And then if it comes out that they were, they've actually now damaged that transparency. And we've seen it time and time again with organizations that are breached, and they say, oh, it's minor. We only lost 5,000 records. And then a week later, oh, well, actually, we lost 50,000 records. But there was no PII. And then 2 weeks later, actually, we lost 50 million records. And by the way, your social security numbers were in there. So being transparent and being open, I think, is really critical there. And then also focusing, and I said this before, focusing on a life cycle for your program. It's not just about protection or prevention. It's about detection. It's about response. And I think that, being customer centric and helping your customers understand we are committed to protecting your data. We're committed to maintaining, operational capabilities so that you depend upon us. We're not going to go away. There was a story that I actually was talking about a while ago. A 150-year-old logistics company in the UK got hit with ransomware in mid 2023, and in 45 days they were essentially out of business. Talk about a reputational hit. And there were a lot of things they should have been doing that they were not doing, which is definitely more than we're going to talk about. But I think understanding that your brand is maybe the most valuable thing you have, and you always want to be able to defend the decisions that you have made. We accepted that risk. It was within our risk appetite. Knowing what we know now, we might not accept that risk, or we would continue to. But I think those things are very, very important for brand preservation. And then finally, as I said, I don't think it's a cybersecurity problem. It's a problem for the CEO. It's a problem for corporate communications. It's a problem for legal and compliance. So we need to really work with all of those folks and come up with, if something happens, here's how we interface with the media. If something happens, here's how we interface with our customers, with shareholders, if we happen to be publicly traded. Here's how we interface with law enforcement. Here's how we interface with the media. And I don't think enough companies do enough prep there. And then, of course, something bad happens and the press makes phone calls, and people who should not be talking are talking. So all of those sort of have impact on that brand sort of value and preservation.
Thanks, Mr. Jeffrey. You were given it is not our cybersecurity problem, it's an enterprise problem. We need to align with each and every team. So you have clearly mentioned those things. And 3 points you mentioned. So one thing is trust center. When we are collecting a data, where we are hosting, where we are keeping, we need to make sure that everyone should know about it and where we are. Like if it is a cloud environment, if it is a on-prem or any environment, we need to make sure to build a trust center. Second thing, transparency in open. And you clearly told whatever happens, and we need to be open and transparent to our customers. If we are not, if we are saying like we have not breached, or if we are saying like some kind of information that will that will spoil our reputation, as you mentioned. Third thing is don't look at the program. It is the life cycle of a program. Detect and response, whatever comes in. So we need to make sure it is a life cycle, not only one thing. And to follow up on this, Mr. Jeffrey, it's a real-time scenario question, because where I've seen couple of person who worked in an organization, they provide with the organization ID. Let's say I work for CyberVoyage. I do have a Dinesh Manoharan at cybervoyage.in. And now I'm going to use some third-party website with my personal email ID. So let's say I have a Dinesh Manoharan at gmail.com. Now I've created those account with Dinesh Manoharan at gmail.com. And now for a secondary email, I'm just going to give a Dinesh Manoharan at cybervoyage.in, which most of the persons, they do use it. Organization ID, they create an account. Now, last week we have read the news, like most of the companies or most of the dark web, they provide such company has been, the data has been leaked. In such scenarios, but logged in with my personal ID, but in my personal ID, my secondary email is this organization email ID. Few persons, they keep both passwords are same. Now there is a chance these dark web even some cyber criminals get the data from dark web, and they do have a multiple forum sites like breach forum. The FBI has been banned now. There are lots of sites who cyber criminals can download the data now, attack against a company because they got a personal information, but now they are going to attack against the company. Now at this situation, how do an organization can build a policy to make sure if the personal information of the current company, let's say Dinesh Manoharan at cybervoyage.in, who have a personal email which has been breached in dark web, now those personal details which we can get from threat intelligence through our internal tools and technologies, now I can able to see this cybervoyage.in added a personal email in their website, which this can leads to your company as well. So at at this situation, how to bring a cyber security program in an enterprise level? If the person uses a personal email ID along with the corporate, how to make sure he or they needs to be a safe, and is there any notification that we can send it across to all the person? See, we have seen like internally, hey, see, you are working in this company, but your email has been breached in other side. We are going to send a notification to you, please change your password, something. Is there any kind of a cyber security program can be initiated in an environment, Mr. Jeffrey?
So again, back to what I said before about governance and policy. So being very clear about what expectations are. What you alluded to really is the concept of around credential stuffing, which is all the username and password pairs are out there. So encouraging people to use multi-factor authentication, pushing companies to support better MFA. Right now the default is text-based MFA, which is not necessarily super secure. There are ways around that. So pushing your vendors to use MFA, encouraging users to sign up so that even if their username password gets breached, they still don't get sort of owned. I also think that implementing tools, and I'm not a tool person by any stretch, but looking at tools that are looking at deep packet inspection, data loss prevention, data leak prevention, detection and response and intrusion prevention, and looking for data flows, looking for triggers of things, that doesn't look right. We should probably start asking some questions. And then here's the key thing, Dinesh, and nobody really wants to talk about this. When you do a good job creating policy and you put the controls in place and people bypass those controls, they need to be held accountable. If people are educated about what good is and they don't do those things, they need to be punished. I think we need to make sure that we're not putting them in a position where they're exposed, but, we tell them, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and they keep doing it. People need to be held accountable for that. And right now, that's not very common. Most of the time, the blame comes back to security. Why didn't you prevent this? And that's just not a real thing.
Yeah, Mr. Jeffrey. So you told even credential stuffing that nowadays it is very popular, and even though we do have an MFA, DLP, XDR, EDR, MEDR, whatever detect and response that we do have, of course this may happen, and the policy that we do have. So we can create a policy with the whatever the policy that we have, but at the end, people they used to do such kind of activities. They got caught in such kind of activities as well. And thanks for your inputs, Mr. Jeffrey. Now, the other question is, for an organization, if we are designing a cyber security crisis simulation, so which one you will take it forward, and the idea which you are going to create a simulation techniques, and the reader should not forget, and what would be the scenario that you will take it forward, Jeffrey, if you are bringing a cyber security crisis simulation in an organization?
So that's interesting. So I'm going to actually answer it in a different way, because I think that the scenarios are going to be very specific for an organization. But what I will tell you is that when I run workshops like this, the first thing I do is I define the terminology that we're going to use. I'm going to use the word risk, and here's what I mean. I'm going to use the word vulnerability. I'm going to use the word ransomware. I'm going to use the word attacker, and here's how I'm going to use that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I give everyone a different job. So in other words, you're the CISO. No, today for the scenario, you're going to play the role of the CFO. You're the CEO. No, today you're going to play the role of the CIO. And that way, what you do is you force people to see the other perspective because we tend to be very focused on what we do for a living, and I think we need to start getting people to think about other sort of roles and responsibilities. There's a very famous Indian parable about the blind man and the elephant, and I use that as a metaphor all the time. And I use it differently than the way the story is traditionally used, but you should definitely all check it out. But basically, what I always talk about is when you are too close to the problem, you have a hard time seeing the big picture. And I think that's really, really important to be able to do. So I feel like the actual scenarios that we use are not as important as getting people to understand the other story. So when I give people different roles, it doesn't always go the way we want, but you know what I always hear at the end? Wow, I never thought about that before. And that is incredibly powerful. And I think we need more and more people to say that. We never thought about that before. Because then when you go into business planning exercises, say, oh, we should probably invite the security team. We should probably invite the CFO. We should invite the CEO, the COO. And that way you can bring all of these things in. And yes, it can be challenging having all the different personalities and sort of, agendas, for lack of a better term. But I think it's important that we continue to expose people to the things that are important to their colleagues.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And the full statement is to be very specific. So whatever that we are going to implement, the terminology which we are going to implement a terminology. So based on the terminology, I'll invite each and every professionals or CTO, CEO, CFO. So I'll just invite like that you just mentioned, Jeffrey. Now you are going to implement a new cybersecurity investment to your company. You have 3 minutes of time, and you are going to present to CEO, and he's also a skeptical CEO who will not agree to the investment on cybersecurity. Now you have 3 minutes, and how do you make sure to convince him? And what would be the slide that you can convince him, Mr. Jeffrey?
Okay, so 3 minutes. So the first thing I would do is I would articulate back to the CEO what I understand to be corporate objectives. So based on what I understand, our goal is to increase revenue by 10%. We want to increase customer retention by 95%. We want to buy 6 companies this year that will help us fulfill this. Am I correct in those assumptions? Well, yes, Jeffrey, you are. Well, in order for us to do that, there are some dependencies, some of which are technology. We need to implement a program of risk management around those technologies so that we can limit the likelihood and impact of a cybersecurity incident having a negative impact on your goals and objectives. What we would like to do is come up with a plan tied to some investment, and we're going to map that to the potential business impact. And then we want to get your feedback to make sure that we are building a program that is aligned with your risk appetite and your risk tolerance. So we're going to prepare some slides, and we'd like to come back in, 2 weeks to actually go over the slides with you, see if you have any questions so that we can move forward and build our plan and our program. With regard to the presentation material, what we're going to do is we're going to clearly articulate and map the cybersecurity risk landscape into our business goals and objectives so that you have a very clear understanding of the reason why we are focusing on managing the risks that we are going to be investing in managing. Because we recognize you have limited resources, limited time, and limited appetite, frankly, to hear from technology people. So that would be my 3 minutes with no prep.
Thanks, Jeffrey, because you have given lots of information in 3 minutes. So the one thing is increase in revenue, because as a management, of course, they look at the revenues and increment things. And second thing is the retention policy. You mentioned about what kind of things that we can retention, and then business outcome. If you are investing this, and what could be the outcome? And then also you mentioned about the dependency business. If something happens to our company, what would be the dependencies? And then you told about the impact assessment, like competitive assessment, competitive analysis, and then the articulate risk to business. That's why we need to implement. And there are lots of inputs that you just shared, Jeffrey. Now, if you are going to write a research paper for the next decade of cyber risk, because it's been like 30 years, then after 30 after 10 years, if you are going to write a research paper, what would be the key title or thesis that you can take it forward. You will be writing, Mr. Jeffrey. So the title and the key thesis that you will write as a research paper, Mr. Jeffrey.
Wow, that you've got great questions, Dinesh. Thank you. So I I think I would actually write it on third party risk management because that's an area where I am spending a lot of time these days, and I think it's one of our biggest risks. So I'll give you sort of a title. I just did this presentation last week. Third party cyber risk management. When the domino falls, what do we do? So that would be the title, right? So if you're familiar with the game of dominoes, and the thesis would be that we have risk because of companies that we choose to do business with or our business stakeholders choose to do business with. We need to understand what risks we are absorbing as a result of those relationships. We need to have an idea as to what those folks are doing to treat their own risk and threat environment. And we need to build a program that allows us to identify, assess, analyze, treat, and monitor the risks in our extended ecosystem. So that's kind of what I would put out there. Probably not worthy of a PhD thesis, but I think it is a problem that people are struggling with these days.
Thanks, Mr. Jeffrey. So you clearly mentioned the third-party risk management and dominance fall. So it was a great thesis, and of course, I would like to follow you in LinkedIn, and then I'll be keep you watching your insights and your post in LinkedIn hereafter, Jeffrey. And now, if you have an unlimited budget for a cybersecurity initiatives, and which system you will build for your own organization? Because a few years back there is no AI, and now AI, wherever we go, we see AI. It has been imported, or it has been integrated, or it is going to be a build or a product. Now you have, but most of the organization doesn't have an unlimited budget. And if you have a unlimited budget, if you got a chance to get an unlimited budget, what systems you'll build for a futuristic thing? Because 10 to 20 years back, there was no war, human wars. Now bio wars and cyber wars is going to be a cyber wars now. So of course, in another 10 to 40 years or 50 years, people will be attacking through the cyber weapons alone. And now we do have, even 2 days back, even open ChatGPT, you also mentioned the Gibri statement. And our our employees need sleep. He has given an open statement. Likewise, which technology you will prefer to for our futuristic thing if you have an unlimited budget, Mr. Jeffrey?
So people say they want unlimited budget, but in fact, unlimited budget is terrible. It's an instance of be careful what you wish for, because the assumption is if you have an unlimited budget, you should be able to solve all of our problems, and that is just not realistic. That being said, I would invest on basic blocking and tackling. So asset discovery, internal and external, both hardware and software. We need to know what's deployed and we need to know where. The second thing is we need to actually implement robust threat and vulnerability management, right? So we need to know not just, hey, these critical vulnerabilities are on these servers, but these critical vulnerabilities are on this server. And by the way, there's exploit code out there. And by the way, it is actively being exploited. And by the way, it's part of a critical partner and or a critical system. So that whole kind of soup to nuts. I would be very, very mindful of implementing controls around privileged users. So that's not just people that are technically privileged, but people that run the payroll system, people that are running AP, people that are running, finance systems, HR systems, et cetera. Those are all privileged users. We have to have better insight into what they are doing, and there are tools that can help you do that. And then finally, I believe that we need to do a better job of understanding what our entire landscape is for risk exposure. So looking at our extended ecosystem, looking at third-party risk management, looking at the potential exposures and the issues around what it is we are trying to accomplish, where our risks are. So I would focus on that, kind of what we talk about, basic blocking and tackling, because it's not really being done in many organizations. There are tons of tools out there, but unless you have good process, unless you have good governance, the tools don't necessarily solve everything or anything.
Thanks, Mr. Jeffrey. And you mentioned like 4 points: internal and external assets. I'll just give more budget on the discovering of the asset management. I'll take it forward. Second thing is also the implement threat and VM. If a tool mention, hey, you have a critical issue, but the tool where I can give more budget to the tool where which will give us a, hey, we have a, tool, we have a critical vulnerability, and this has this kind of a POC which is available in GitHub, which you can exploit, and you will be implement a more threat and VM process as well, which you have mentioned, Jeffrey. And then payroll, AP, finance, and they do have multiple system which we can get more insights from them as well, that we can do a budgeting systems over there, and landscape and exposure. So that is also thanks for your insights, Mr. Jeffrey. Now it's been 45 minutes, Jeffrey. The final question we're going to ask is, even we do have a tools, we do have a technologies, we do have a risk assessment methodologies, we do have a vulnerability management process, we'll be having a dark web investigation, we'll be having a threat intelligence program, we might have a SOC investigations, even the EDR team will be there, immediate team will be there, even we performed all the layered based approach in an organization. But now, what could be the blind spot in current risk management, even especially with AI threats? Because nowadays even AI threats is going to happen. Even most of the companies, they are building a process or technology for AI driven attacks. Now, even though we do have all the technologies, tools, and whatever it is, but few things are the blind spot. And what is the biggest blind spot in risk assessment, Mr. Jeffrey?
I think right now the biggest blind spot is in third parties. Um, we talk to organizations all the time. They don't know who their third parties are. They don't know what their dependencies are. They frequently don't know what those third parties do for them. I mean, so my wife has her own company she built. It's a small company. It's her and a couple of contractors. She has 35 vendors. She's a one person show. Imagine what the expansion looks like when we are looking at hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of vendors. And we have customers that are using us to monitor 100,000 vendors through their entire ecosystem. And I always say cybersecurity may only be part of the problem, but has an outsized impact. Imagine if one of your key vendors got hit with ransomware and they were down for a week. How long would you be impacted for? And the answer is invariably longer than a week. So I think that's the biggest blind side right now is third party vendor risk, supply chain risk. People don't know what they don't know. They don't know what their exposures are. And frankly, they don't really know what to do about it.
Thanks, Mr. Jeffrey. So it's been like 45 minutes, and the final question you mentioned about the third party management is the blind spot even most of the organization they are facing. So, based on your 30 years of experience, it's been like 45 minutes of discussion. We have got lots of insights from you, Mr. Jeffrey. Starting from you have given your introduction, like you wanted to be a pen tester. Later on, you just moved to networking, and then you just got into a strategic planning kind of activities. Then you mentioned about the risk-based behaviors, and then you mentioned about a couple of movie analogy. Because when the question has been raised for movie analogy, what would be your suggestion? You just gave some movie things as well, and you given an insights on people process technology, because most of the companies they don't follow the process people, but they wanted to buy a tool. You just gave an insights on that as well, Mr. Jeffrey. And you given about the governance, and because money comes in, money goes out, but if something happens, who is going to be trouble? You just gave that statement as well. It was a great statement, because most of the organization, of course, they'll be following this kind of a statement to make sure their organization are safe. Then you gave about the brand intelligence. If something happens to my brand, what I'm going to do with those brand, and how to make sure to secure my organization as well. And it was a great insight to Mr. Jeffrey. Then you mentioned about the credential surfing, and then implement MFA, DLP, those things also you have explained. And later on, he just gave about the terminology, because as a cybersecurity process, to build a process, you'll be giving a terminology, you'll be the technical term very specific. That is also we got an insights from you. Then later on, you just gave about the slide. You have 3 minutes of time, and how we are going to explain the new process to a CEO to make sure to get a budget from the particular process. And finally, you just gave about the blind spot, and then the unlimited budget if you get. And there are lots of insights we got from you, Mr. Jeffrey. Now it's been like 45 minutes. Those insights are valuable to us, Mr. Jeffrey, because our cyber warriors, they are watching. They have 0 years of experience. They are a college student. They have 15 years of experience, and 20 and 25. Now, based on your insights, of course, they'll be learning a lot from your input, and then of course they'll, in another few years, there will be a startup founders will be coming from our cyber warriors. There will be leaders will be coming from us, because based on your insights, we see, we observed a lots of leadership quality from that, Jeffrey. Because apart from technical skills, when we ask the questions with you, the 3 minutes of time, we have got lots of leadership insights. Because as a technical person, initially we don't get the leadership insights within a short period of time. But based on this discussion, we got a lots of leadership insights as well. So we learn the objective is, cybersecurity is not something like a technical thing. It is something like we need to be a technical, we need to be a process, we need to be in a management. Of course, the third party management comes in, and we'll be having a multiple teams, and lots of insights has been got from you, Mr. Jeffrey. And thanks for your time, Mr. Jeffrey. So thank you so much for your time, this particular
No,
insights and
my pleasure, Dinesh. Thank you for having me. And if anyone wants to connect to me on LinkedIn. I post a bunch of good stuff, and yeah, appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of your viewers/listeners.
thanks, Mr. Jeffrey.